This is Keep the Faith Ministry News. I'm Hal Mayer. According to a 2012 Pentagon report declassified in 2015, the U.S. administration was fully aware that it was cultivating the rise of the Islamic State. The report reveals that Western governments coordinated with Gulf states and Turkey to intentionally support Al-Qaeda and other Islamist extremist groups to topple dictator Bashar al-Assad in Syria, despite anticipating that doing so could lead to the emergence of an extremist Salafist principality or an Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, in other words, ISIS. The declassified Pentagon document foresaw the likely rise of the Islamic State as a direct consequence of the strategy, but described this outcome as a strategic opportunity to isolate the Syrian regime. This also was credible justification for the U.S. to sell weapons to replenish and modernize U.S. allies such as Saudi Arabia and Iraq. What was not clear up until the release of the document was how the U.S. predetermined the course of events in the Middle East. There is the possibility of establishing a declared or undeclared Salafist principality in eastern Syria, Hasaka and Derzor, the declassified document says. And this is exactly what the supporting powers to the opposition want, in order to isolate the Syrian regime. While some media outlets have reported on the U.S. intelligence community's internal prediction of the rise of ISIS, none of them have accurately acknowledged the details exposing how the West knowingly fostered a sectarian, Al-Qaeda-driven rebellion in Syria with its consequential and massive bloodshed, human suffering, and mass migration into Europe. In spite of being accurately aware of the dire risks of this strategy, the Pentagon went ahead anyway. The establishment of a Salafist principality in eastern Syria, the document says, would create the ideal atmosphere for Al-Qaeda in Iraq to return to the old pockets in Mosul and Ramadi. Charles Shoebridge, a former British counter-terrorism intelligence officer, said, "Throughout the early years of the Syria crisis, the U.S. and the U.K. governments, and almost universally the West's mainstream media, promoted Syria's rebels as moderate, liberal, secular, democratic, and therefore deserving of the West's support." None of it was true. Brad Hoff, a former U.S. Marine, affirmed that U.S. intelligence predicted the rise of the Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant, or ISIL, or ISIS, but instead of clearly delineating the group as an enemy, the report envisions the terror group as a U.S. strategic asset and offers a tool for regime change in Syria. No wonder critics of the U.S. strategy have repeatedly raised questions about the role of coalition allies in intentionally providing extensive support to Islamist terrorist groups in Syria. Russia saw through it clearly and eventually began its own campaign against ISIS, which was much more effective than the half-hearted U.S. campaign. U.S. Vice President Joe Biden admitted in 2014 that Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, and Turkey had funneled hundreds of millions of dollars to Islamist rebels in Syria that metamorphosed into ISIS, though he did not admit that the entire covert strategy was sanctioned and supervised by the U.S., Britain, France, Israel, and other Western powers. All of this raises troubling questions about the intentions of the U.S., Britain, and other allies. Why would they deliberately create so much death, misery, and suffering in an effort to destabilize a dictatorial regime in Syria? War doesn't just happen spontaneously. It is cultivated by earthly powers with ambitions under the guidance of their unseen leader. How can the U.S. President, his officials, and advisors sleep at night knowing they have created so much bloodshed, misery, and chaos? Today, the signs of the times declare that we are standing on the threshold of great and solemn events. Everything in our world is in agitation. Before our eyes is fulfilling the Savior's prophecy of the events to precede his coming. "Ye shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. Nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom." That's Lift Him Up, page 364. "Behold, the Lord maketh the earth empty, and maketh it waste, and turneth it upside down, and scattereth abroad the inhabitants thereof. The land shall be utterly emptied and utterly spoiled, for the Lord hath spoken this word. The earth also is defiled under the inhabitants thereof, because they have transgressed the laws, changed the ordinance, broken the everlasting covenant. Isaiah 24, verses 1 through 5. This is Keep the Faith Ministry News. Thank you for watching.